It is Victory Monday! 49ers just came off of a huge divisional win against the Seahawks, but it also comes with some tragic news. We're going to go through it all, including who's to blame for the Trey Lance injury. Keep it locked. I got my baby bro, Rohan Chakravarthi. We live! Had to give you guys the prettiest face in the YouTube community, 49ers community, but welcome, fam. Thank you so much for joining us on this Victory Monday episode of So Real Sports Talk TV. I am your host, So Real Sunil. We got baby bro, Rohan Chakravarthi. Dude, the way that he gets into the 49ers locker room, even though he's out there in Wisconsin doing his Badger thing, is amazing. But Rohan, thank you for joining me this afternoon. How you feeling, bro?
Hey, I mean, like you said, it's Victory Monday for the 49ers. People should be excited, but not really, right? It's like probably the gloomiest Victory Monday that we've had in a while. Obviously, Trey Lance got injured. That's an issue for the 49ers, but hopefully, everybody can regroup, pray for Trey while moving forward now, because we've got Jimmy Garoppolo, who's going to lead us for the sixth, or is this his fifth? I think this might be his fifth or sixth season with the team now.
Fifth and a half, right? He came in halfway in 2017, got injured a couple years, but we're definitely going to get into all of that. But you stated it right off the jump. And before we go into who's to blame or not, Rohan, do want to report some very good news. Trey Lance did have his surgery at Stanford University. By all reports, it went very successful. They repaired a fracture as well as some ligament issues. And he's now starting the rehab process. And the goal is for him to be ready and fully healthy for the start of the 2023 season, where I guess we started all over again. Right, Rohan? But the biggest narrative that is coming through, if you are paying attention to the Twitterverse, is Kyle Shanahan is to blame for this, right? You have some pretty big names in the 49er content creation community that are advocating for this and championing that Kyle Shanahan has been using Trey Lance the wrong way. And there's a lot of the fan base that is blaming Kyle Shanahan for this. In your opinion, Rohan, is Kyle Shanahan to blame for the Trey Lance injury?
To me, no, but I don't think it's as clear-cut as that. I personally believe that the game plan that the 49ers utilized, well, let's first talk specifically. The specific play call that the 49ers utilized there, I had no problem with. Some people have pointed out how the 49ers utilized that play call 2 plays before, and it's somewhat ironic. 2 plays before, when Deebo Samuel ran for 51 yards, I honestly thought Trey Lance should have kept that ball and run it himself. Obviously, Deebo Samuel made his play. Second, the 49ers on the play that Trey Lance got injured, I thought he should have handed it off to Ray McCloud. I thought McCloud would have been open, coming off in a way like I think he was coming in motion on the play. No, I think he was in the backfield on the play. I thought that was the angle that he should have taken. But regardless, we know what happens. Is Kyle Shanahan to blame? No, because the inevitable truth right now, in my opinion at least, is that Trey Lance, this is a part of his skill set. It's not, I don't call it power run. I call it option run, because that's the play. he is a zone read quarterback. That's one of the aspects in which he is most comfortable. And when you talk about dual threat quarterbacks, you want to utilize both facets of his game. I don't know if Trey Lance really can take the top off necessarily. Or let me rephrase. Me personally, I don't think Trey Lance is as elusive as some of the other quicker quarterbacks despite his 4.4 speed. I think he's fast, just not as elusive, which is what happens, which is what you take away from those quarterbacks that can hit the edge, preferably Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, quarterbacks like that. So I'm fine with them running as quarterback power, or not power, but quarterback option. And I also understand that Trey Lance himself said last week, if it's a play like that, I'm not going to slide. I want to fight for it. To me, it seems like he himself feels comfortable in that role in running that zone read. And that's why it was a part of the game plan. I think if you implement no part of Lance's legs, that's an issue. However, let me get to the point that I believe is true. I didn't like the amount of utilization necessarily. And I'm not saying in week 2. Week 2 was the third run of the game. It wasn't much more. But in general, I did want a little less of that version of Trey Lance. I want more spread out runs on Trey Lance. And I understand I just said that he might not have the elusiveness to hit the edge necessarily. But there are different ways to run your quarterback. And while this is one of his strengths, I want a different bit of variety rather than running between the tackles every single time. However, like I said, it's a part of his skill set. I think that is important to note, and I think that Kyle Shanahan should not be to blame.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the game plan that everybody saw out of Kyle Shanahan when Trey Lance had his first start against Arizona is what stuck in everybody's mind, right? The way that he played Trey, which it seemed like there was just a lot of called power runs or runs down the middle, however, whatever that play call is. And clearly that's not what you want to see with your quarterback, because the type of hits that you're opening up your quarterback to clearly can lead to injuries. Now, if someone is of the notion that that is the wrong way to use your quarterback because it leads to injury, obviously they'll look at this and take that narrative to be like, see what happened. You did another run like this and Trey Lance got injured, and in their mind they would probably be like, this is true, right? But I'm like you. I don't know if I could blame Kyle Shanahan for this, because this is just a freak injury, right? Like, it's not every single day that somebody fractures their ankle in the NFL. Like, you see certain injuries that happen a lot. This was more similar to that Dak Prescott injury. Thankfully, wasn't as intense as that Dak Prescott injury, but how often are you seeing that type of injury? Thankfully, not a lot. And unfortunately, it happened to Trey Lance, right? He's a big guy. His legs, he planted, and his body went a different way. And just with the type of force that you're getting in the NFL from these type of tackles and the strength of these players, it leads to these freak injuries that are few and far between. However, I think that the point that you made is something that is a little bit interesting, because does Trey Lance have the ability to run? Yes. Is it an elite weapon of his? That is where I think the debate is, Rohan. And what I mean by that is, like you said, he's not elusive. And I think that a lot of people think that Trey Lance has the ability like a Lamar Jackson. He doesn't have a Lamar Jackson, Mike Vick type ability to run. He just is mobile, right? He's more Josh Allen style running than Lamar Jackson style running. But even in the Josh Allen style, I don't even think Trey Lance is as elite as Josh Allen quite yet, because he hasn't dealt with this type of speed and this type of athleticism. What he was dealing with in college, he was a man amongst boys, right? He was the bigger, stronger, faster type individual. So when you look at these runs, which are very similar to what he did at NDSU, he's comfortable with these runs, but he's dealing with a much different defender that he was dealing with in college. And that takes some time to get used to. So I agree with you. I don't put this on Kyle Shanahan. However, and I want to get your opinion on this, Rohan, because this is something that I said, and some people get at me for it. Some people don't. I still don't see Kyle Shanahan completely comfortable calling a game for Trey Lance. And when Jimmy came in, it seemed like he was just more comfortable calling plays for Jimmy than he is for Trey Lance. Now, I don't know if that's feelings over facts. I don't have numbers to be able to back that up. I'm just going off just a sense from the very limited amount of time we've seen Kyle Shanahan call games for Trey, which is basically what, like three full games and then a half and then, 2 series. It just seems like he's not as comfortable as it is for Jimmy. Do you get the same sense, or am I making something out of nothing?
I think it's too early to tell, but I think I'll tend to disagree. And what I mean
Okay.
by that is there was an interesting comment by Kyle Shanahan yesterday that a lot of fans brushed off, but I have actually been of the belief that it was true. And it was the comment where Kyle Shanahan was addressing Jimmy Garoppolo's first 4 plays being passes compared to Trey Lance's, obviously his disparity. I have a couple of things to say about that. First of all, I honestly think the 49ers would have done the exact same game script with Trey Lance that they were doing with Jimmy Garoppolo on those first 4 plays. Because what Kyle Shanahan wanted to do in this game was establish the run and utilize the pass. Why? Seattle has had a tendency to sell out for the run for the 49ers. And second, it was freaking working. The first 2 drives for the 49ers, they had 143 yards with Trey Lance at the quarterback spot. 143 yards. Now, they got only a field goal out of the first drive and a field goal out of the second drive, but they were there, right? They were in range to score both times. And that's because the ball was moving. The run game was really dominant in general, and that involved Lance in the run game. It was Lance, Deebo Samuel, Jeff Wilson, even TDP. It was working. You don't shy away from things that work. And I've criticized Shanahan for shying away from things that work at times, and then that creates a stalling offense. But I do think that, honestly, since they established the run on those first 2 drives, on that next drive, it was going to be something different because now Seattle's going to sell out to stop the run. And how do you avoid that? You start passing the football. And that's what Kyle Shanahan did. Now, may he have wanted to establish the pass even more with Garoppolo, knowing how his limitations will impact the game later on? Because you saw Seattle try and stop the run consistently. The run game kind of faded as the game went on with Garoppolo at quarterback, which is a tendency we saw last year as well. Not the run game fading, but teams trying to sell out to stop the run, which makes it more difficult on the play caller to call running plays, right? And so to me, I think maybe there was a little more urgency given Garoppolo's limitations and that Lance always possesses the threat of a run. But I do think that it would have been the same game script. And regarding your original question about is Kyle comfortable? I still think it's too early to tell. We've seen him pretty much coach. I don't count last year too much. In the second half of last year's game, or after the game, really in the Texans game, Kyle said he's still learning how to call plays for Lance. This offseason, we saw a little bit of a better adjustment, but it's training camp. We haven't really seen a full sample size because the first game was in a monsoon. That automatically dictates that running the football is going to be the game pace.
Right.
We really haven't seen it, and that's why I don't think that answer can be conclusive yet.
That's fair. It just seems like the flow is a little bit different and more comfortable for Kyle when Jimmy is there. However, like you said, it's a very small sample size. It could be just circumstances over actual, reality, because obviously all those games that Trey was in, there was very different circumstances. It wasn't just like in the normal flow of things. Last year, he was just jumping in when Jimmy was injured. This year, obviously monsoon the first season, and then there was a game plan that they had started, and then I guess Jimmy may have just finished it off. But let's move on to, obviously now with Trey gone for the season, Jimmy is the play call or the quarterback starting QB for the rest of the season. Knock on wood, hopefully he can stay healthy. But how does this offense change, or how is this offense affected now, Rohan, with Jimmy G at the helm?
It's different in a way. Now you don't have the threat, right, of that quarterback that can be a threat with his legs. And I think it kind of like reverts back to what we saw last year at times. And what do I mean by that? Well, you would see 7, 8, 9 people in the not 9, but 6 to 8 people in the box at times to sell out the run. We saw that in the Rams game at times. So in a way, it does make Kyle Shanahan's job a little more difficult when play calling because he has to now account for that. Additionally, Garoppolo's limitations. I do want to see him try and throw the ball downfield more. I thought his ball to Brandon Ayuk yesterday was perfect, but overall, it's not that I was disappointed by Garoppolo's performance, but I wasn't inspired by his performance in general. It was a great job from him to come off the bench and do what he did. But if that's the type of performance that he's going to have in a regular game, it's going to be tough for this offense to continue to move the ball consistently. I think that it was, in a way, especially towards the end of the game, it was a little stalling of an offensive game plan. And so are you going to rely on your defense consistently every game? I think this team is still a playoff team with Garoppolo at the helm. I think it's a little more certain kind of what this team is, given the certainty that Garoppolo provides at quarterback. But it is going to be a little more difficult because you understand Garoppolo's limitations. And also, I don't know, we'll see how the game plan changes. But I think that middle of the field was utilized pretty consistently with Lance. So I don't think there's going to be too many alterations with the playbook. But now Shanahan has to devise different ways to run the football and establish that run game without Elijah Mitchell, his top option, which likely means more utilization of Deebo Samuel, maybe. We'll see. But I think that, it's going to be a little tougher given that you don't have your top running back, and now you're going to have to set that identity every time because you don't have that threat at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely get into how this impacts the running game in a little bit. Want to shout out some guys. Raphael562, what's up, Sunil, Rohan, and everyone? What's up, Raphael? And he's throwing out like and subscribe, everyone. Definitely, if you can, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Rohan's link is in the description as well. So definitely go subscribe to his channel as well. Want to shout out Mr. Harold Murillo. Thank you for joining in. And I like this from Emiliano. I put it up earlier. Kyle might not be at fault, but he certainly didn't help. All true. But, Jimmy, I actually, I know you said you're not inspired, but I was pleasantly surprised. And I think one of the reasons why, not only did he come off of the bench, but this was the first time we got to see him after his shoulder surgery. So the fact that he had shoulder surgery, came in, and he still had some zip on his ball, Rohan, was very pleasantly surprised because we never know how people are going to respond to the injury or to a surgery. And the fact that he came out and he threw the ball well, and it led to touchdowns instead of field goals, which was what was happening earlier in the game. I think all of that led to me being pleasantly surprised. Now, excuse me, how does this change the overall offense? I don't expect necessarily that deep ball is going to come back. Maybe that's going to be maybe one or two times per game. But one thing that Jimmy Garoppolo does well is the quick get the ball out of his hands type passes, which is going to help out the offensive line, I think, because they're not going to have to necessarily pass block as long with Jimmy there because he gets the ball out rather quickly. And we're going to just see more of these yak plays, right? We're not going to necessarily see the whole playbook like we believed we would be able to see with Trey, because obviously at that point you're playing 11 on 11. And, I put up this tweet, Rohan, and it's been getting mixed reviews. And I'll read it verbatim because, I think that maybe some people may have gotten the wrong idea. I don't know. But I want to read it and I want to get your thoughts on it. So I put up Jimmy stands, throw salt on the wound, ready to take any chance to claim the 49ers are better now. Trey stands are unwilling to admit that Jimmy looked good yesterday and the offense moved the best it has all season. 49er fans are sad for Trey, but excited the season's not over. And what I meant by that is obviously, this fan base has splintered around this whole Jimmy and Trey. There are Jimmy stands, there's Trey stands, and then I think there's overall, 49er fans, and that encompasses those two groups as well. Trey Lance was looking very good at the beginning of that game. Unfortunately, the drives led to field goals instead of touchdowns. I don't know if you put that on Trey or if you put that on the play calling, but that's what happened. Unfortunately, Trey goes out. He's injured. Jimmy comes in, and then they put 2 touchdowns on the board very quickly in the second quarter. To me, that is a good sign, right? Because I don't know if Nate Sudfeld comes in and that's the same situation. I don't know if Brock Purdy comes in and that's the same situation. At the end of the day, for me, I'm a 49er fan. It would suck if in the first quarter in week 2 or whenever that happened with Trey, if I don't remember if it's second quarter and the first quarter, whenever that injury happened, to know that your season is done after that, and all of a sudden we don't have anything to look forward for the rest of the season. It sucks for Trey, because we could talk about this on another episode. I don't know what happens to Trey's career after this type of injury, because there's a lot of things. It's an uphill battle from this point on with where he was at in his development. But as a 49er fan, Jimmy coming in and playing decent to well. I don't think he played bad. I don't think he played amazing, but I think he would fall under that decent to good type Jimmy. It was definitely good Jimmy. I think that bodes well for the team. And if you're a 49er fan, you got to look at this and say the team still has a chance to be competitive. You think they're still a playoff team. We've seen this team the last 2 healthy seasons with Jimmy be competitive to try to make it to a Super Bowl, right? NFC Championship game last year, Super Bowl visit the 2019-2020 season. So yeah, man, what do you think about that tweet? Do you agree? Do you disagree with what I stated?
I agree with some part. I think the 49er fan part that you said, right? Bummed for Trey, but excited for what this team can do. I think that's true. You have to be, right? Because this 49ers team is still talented. 49er fans have known that you don't need the elite quarterback to take you to the playoffs. And I mean, we've seen it in 2019, you've seen it in 2021, and we might have seen it in 2022. Because I don't know if we can call Trey Lance elite without having game film, right? So yeah, I think we've seen this story before, but the one part that I'll disagree with, I don't think the offense moved better with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. I think it honestly moved better the first 2 drives when Trey Lance was at quarterback. The only difference was Garoppolo was passing on some of those throws and Trey Lance was throwing. But like I said earlier, I honestly thought that third drive, the one that resulted in the 49ers' first touchdown, that would have been the exact same way with Trey Lance. Why? Because that's where Kyle Shanahan got in his bag. Garoppolo wasn't making great throws necessarily. He was hitting open throws, but receivers were wide open. There was first the 15-yard penalty, or not 15. I forget how many yards it was. It was around 15 on the DPI from Kobe Bryant on the throw to Deebo Samuel where he was held. Samuel would have been open had he not been held on that play, and he was even breaking away after the hold. On the next play, Brandon Ayuk was wide open. The next play, Ray McLeod was wide open. And then the following, I don't know if McLeod was open necessarily, but he was fairly open. And then on the following play, Ross Dwelly was wide open. So I think that, regardless of who was at quarterback, that sequence of plays was probably going to be called because Shanahan wanted to get those receivers open. That's the best way to make your quarterback feel comfortable. Have him hit open targets, right? And so to me, I don't necessarily know, here's what I'll say. The offense did move well on that drive. But I don't necessarily know if you attribute it all to Garoppolo. I still think the offense overall, with the biggest impact on the quarterback, moved well in those first 2 drives. But Garoppolo did not play bad. That's what I said earlier. I wasn't inspired by his performance because I still think that there's a good amount of mistakes to clean up that we've seen in the past. But it is his start coming off the bench and a game plan that wasn't oriented towards him and him coming off shoulder surgery. So not too worried necessarily. And I think next week and the week after will really be a bigger indicator of where he is in general with the offense.
Yep, and Emiliano agrees with you, Rohan. Couldn't agree with you more. Murillo's speedsters is what is missing from the offense. Fast receivers do open up the field. That leads me to my next question. Great segue there. Who benefits the most from Jimmy G being out there, and who benefits the least? Because I think that kind of ties in to maybe what Harold Murillo just spoke about. But I'll leave that question for you, Rohan. Who benefits the most from Jimmy G? Who benefits the least?
I think it'll be a bit of a surprise when you hear my answer.
Sure.
I mean, first of all, I think it does benefit George Kittle, but I think it benefits both Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk, in my opinion, has gotten to the point where he has developed the entirety of the route tree And the 49ers trust him to run the entirety of the route tree. He's not just a deep threat. He ran a variety of different routes and was the 49ers leading receiver this week with 5 catches and 63 yards. I think Deebo Samuel should get obviously more options, and there might be a little more comfortability given obviously that Samuel has worked a ton more with Garoppolo than Lance, and the lack of communication, not the lack, but the lesser communication between Lance and Samuel over the offseason. I think that he should benefit, but I think Brandon Ayuk should also benefit as well as George Kittle. As for who benefits the least, I think it's the run game. So Jeff Wilson Jr. And I also think that it is probably Danny Gray if you're talking about a receiver because of those limitations. I like that Garoppolo threw that back shoulder 40-yard fade to Brandon Ayuk last in the past game in which Ayuk should have caught that ball likely. But overall, I don't know how much that's going to be a part of the offense. It's great to see Garoppolo sling it, but like I said, when with the offense adapting a little bit, don't know how much it'll be. But if we can see Garoppolo throw like that 3-4 times a game, then Danny Gray might get some action in that type of game. But overall, I think the biggest impact, given that they'll play more, is the running game, the running backs and Jeff Wilson Jr. Why? Because now you got to stack the box a little more, given that teams know how Jimmy operates, right? Teams might stack the box. I think Denver, you'll see them stack the box a little more, and that obviously impacts the running game. You got to be a lot more decisive. Got to use your vision more, find the hole, and hit the hole immediately, which might be tougher for rookie running backs entering their first season of the league.
Yeah. Yeah, initially, if I were to say this before I saw Jimmy play, I would say that Brandon Ayuk would be on the this affects him negatively because the connection between Jimmy and Brandon wasn't the greatest. When Jimmy was there, I definitely believe that Deebo is going to benefit from this because for whatever reason, his connection with Jimmy utilizes Deebo a lot more than necessarily Trey did. Now that could be because, like I said, small sample size. So I'm sure that relationship would have grown, but obviously Deebo's biggest year was when Jimmy was there. So you would assume that would be a big plus for them. But he did throw the ball quite a bit to Brandon Ayuk while he was out there, which was once again pleasantly surprised because I expect Brandon Ayuk to have a big year this year. He was the leading, receiver yesterday. And I think that he will continue to get a lot of balls thrown his way, even from Jimmy, because of what you mentioned. And I have to agree with you with who's going to be affected the most. I do think the speedy receivers probably because, just Jimmy's arm isn't as strong as Trey's. But I think the biggest impact is going to be in the running game because now it's not 11 on 11, right? Nobody looks at Jimmy as a threat. That whole QB option is no longer a play that's in the playbook. It's clearly just going to be power run, zone run, and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, the year that we saw the 49ers have their best rushing attack with Jimmy at quarterback, they had track speed, right? And right now they don't have track speed, right? And that is going to be whether or not they can overcome that because they didn't figure it out last year. I mean, the rushing game was good when Elijah Mitchell was there, but outside of Elijah Mitchell, they haven't been able to figure out necessarily the running game with Jimmy G back there as quarterback. So that's going to be what's going to be the biggest challenge and what's going to be affected. I think you explained it perfectly as far as stacking the box, and they have to figure something out. The positive though, Rohan, is Mike McGlinchey is there, and he wasn't there last year. So possibly, with Mike McGlinchey there, he's obviously a really good run blocker. That gives them the ability to run down both sides because they have Trent on one side, McGlinchey on one side. So that may give them some bail. But Jeff Wilson Jr. averaged 4.7 yards yesterday. Let's hope that he could continue to do the same because that's going to be needed if this team is going to keep moving forward because obviously the play action is really important to Jimmy G's game. Otherwise, you're once again putting Deebo in a situation where he's going to have to handle a majority of the rushing, explosive rushing plays, which I don't know if we want to see that as far as the default Deebo in the backfield.
Yeah, and I think one thing about the rushing game, you talk about Jeff Wilson Jr. He was really him and Samuel were the only efficient kind of runners in that game.
Hmm.
Wilson, 4.7 yards per carry. Samuel, 13.3 yards per carry. But overall, when you look at the 49ers numbers, they ran 45 times. You thought their running game was moving a bit. They only ran for 4.2 yards per carry in general. And I understand there were a lot of, what do you call it, red zone plays that were inefficient, didn't get the job done. But that is another thing to watch.
Yeah, it is. It is something to watch. I think the biggest thing is we needed a victory. We needed the offense to look good. We needed a dominant win, and we were able to still get that, even though our starting quarterback went down. Not many teams are able to dominate that much with a backup quarterback. Luckily, and I want to give a round of applause to the 49ers front office for how insane this offseason was with the quarterback move. They had a plan and they believed that this team was better with Jimmy, and they weren't willing to give up Jimmy for just nothing. And because of their stubbornness, when all the pressure and everybody was yelling at them for making the wrong move and handling this situation in a terrible way, the fact that they stuck to their guns ended up getting to a point where they exhausted all options, couldn't trade them for what they wanted, and were willing to negotiate, were able to negotiate with them, bring them back on a steal of a deal. And because of that, this team is still competitive this year, which if they didn't stick to their guns, Rohan, we might be looking at a completely different season. So hats off to the front office once again, proving that they're one of the more elite front offices in the league. So let us go to the last part, or let us go to start off with the offensive line. So I actually listed some stats. Give me 1 second.
Let's do it.
All right, what did I put up? So the offensive line, I don't know. I'm trying to get the exact numbers, but I'm not sure if these are exact. But over the last 2 games, around 145 rushing yards, 1.5 sacks, and about 65 plays per game. So
Okay.
not ridiculous, not like terrible numbers, right? Everybody is looking at this offensive line as it's the biggest weak spot, but relatively speaking, they've only allowed 3 sacks over the first 2 games and an average of 145 rushing yards per game. Pretty decent numbers for a very inexperienced offensive line. How would you grade the offensive line up until this point? And let's take specifically to week 2.
Yeah, so week 2 was much better than week 1, in my opinion. I thought really the entirety of the offensive line played better. Like you said, I don't think that in week 2 we allowed as many pressures. I think in week 1 it was 12 pressures, and then in week 2 they had 1 sack, which is the Boye Mafe sack, and I think there were about 4 quarterback hits, if I'm not talking right. If I believe so. Uchenna Nwosu, he was one of the better players on the team, but that was the case last week again against a pretty solid Denver Broncos offensive line as well. So to me, I think it's important, and I thought the run game did well, especially near the goal line. For some of those plays, I thought the run game did well. Aaron Banks had a good game. Spencer Burford had a pretty solid game as well. And I think Banks only allowed 1 pressure in the entire game. Trent Williams did solid as well. You don't see as many. You didn't see as many outside zone runs, but I thought the offensive line did well, which is important because now that pocket presence, or not pocket presence, but guarding the pocket is going to be a lot different because you don't have that mobile quarterback. You have Jimmy Garoppolo now, so you can't allow as many sacks because you don't have a quarterback that necessarily extends plays like that.
Right. I think that one of the biggest keys to the offensive line game, or a sign that things are moving in the right direction, is they weren't flagged at all. There was no penalties on the offensive line, which is huge, right?
Good point. Yeah.
So that means that they were playing discipline. They were sticking to their technique. They weren't getting beat to the point where they had to hold and all those types of things. So, a lot of people give the offense a lot of bail because of the monsoon and the weather in week 1. But for some reason, they didn't want to give that same type of bail to the offensive line. It was like that's the reason why the running game was the way it was, the quarterbacks and the receivers, but the offensive line is just trash, right? But they're dealing with the same weather conditions, the same rain, the same foot, like the way they're planting their feet, the hands, the slippery of the hands, and all that kind of stuff. So I think the weather conditions. This is more of a game where you can judge the offensive line than last week, just like every other position on the field. And I think they did really well. Now, granted, this isn't necessarily the scariest defense that they're going to face this year, but
Right.
for what was in front of them, they played them exactly the way that they were supposed to play them, right? The Seattle defense looked like a defense that you're not scared of, and the offensive line did what they needed to do. The offense overall rushed for over 180 yards. They scored 27 points. One sack, no penalties. To me, I'd want that all day, Rohan. And so, to me, I think we're starting to see the makings of what this offensive line is capable of. Do I expect this every single week? Probably not. There's going to be some down games. They're obviously playing, better defenses later on in the season. But the fact that McGlinchey and Williams is there and these guys are playing together more and more, that continuity you can see is growing. I saw some great plays between Brendel and Banks and Brendel and Burford there that I think is promising. I just expect this offensive line to get better and better. But I do think that, a lot of people are maligning them, but they are playing a lot better than people are giving them credit for. So in my books, they're ascending rather than, the descension that a lot of people are putting on them.
Yeah, I think so too. Like when you talk about the offensive line, it's always a unit that people like to harp on because when they do good, you don't necessarily notice it because you notice the rest of the offense doing good. But when they do bad, you notice it the entire time because they're the one giving the sack up or they're the one blowing the play or something like that. So it is a good sign, because everyone was like, the interior offensive line is going to suck. The interior offensive line, somebody should go sign. I kind of remained steadfast over the offseason that no matter, like, if it was going to be the starting five, this was going to be it was going to be an average to an above average unit. What do I mean by that? Probably 10 to 16, somewhere around there in the top 16 teams. It was going to be one of the best offensive lines in the NFC West as well. I thought this offensive line, honestly, was the best in the NFC West across all four because the Seahawks have young talent there, rookies in Cross and Lucas on their offensive line, and not really a complete offensive line. The Cardinals, I'm not too confident in their offensive line as well, but I mean, Kyler Murray can avoid pressure. And then the Rams, they faced offensive line issues. They lost a couple of good key pieces. So to me, I thought the 49ers offensive line would have been the best in the NFC West, especially with Trent Williams. And so far, I mean, the dividends in week 2, albeit against a worse defense, paid off.
I agree. So it's going to be something that I expect to keep, being built upon. And, they're obviously going up against a better defense next week in Denver. So let's continue. Let's hope that, they continue to keep progressing and they're getting better week after week after week. I want to get used to this whole no penalties thing, though, Rohan. That would be a good thing if we keep seeing this offensive line not getting flagged. Well, let's move on. One of the biggest things, obviously, with whoever is at quarterback, that is that this rushing attack needs to be good. They put up over 180 yards, like I said, last week or this last week. The main two guys that were getting the ball in Debo and Jeff Wilson Jr. averaged, insane. Jeff Wilson Jr. 4.7 yards. You mentioned Debo over 13 yards. So overall effective, even though, 4.2 yards was what the overall average was. But still, I think that 4.2 was, like you said, there was a lot of goal line plays, 1 yards here, all that kind of stuff that led to that. But I would say that it was a positive rushing game for the 49ers. Once again, not necessarily the scariest defense, but still a positive thing to see. Can this rushing attack be sustained, though? Because I think that a lot of that success was with Trey there. I mean, Marco has put up the number that, there was a certain, I think, 100 rushing yards in the first two series alone with Trey there. And then when Jimmy came in, the rest of it,
like
88, right? Or 81 or 82, whatever the rest of it was. So clearly a big discrepancy as far as the rushing game with Trey there, the rushing game without Trey there. Do you feel like with just Jimmy there now, Trey's not there anymore, can this still be an elite rushing attack?
I think that it can, but I do think that it'll be tougher, like I mentioned earlier, because now teams are going to try and defend the run. They're going to force Kyle Shanahan to throw the ball because at times he seemed like he isn't confident with Garoppolo throwing the football. And so they're going to stack the box. They're going to sell out against the run. At least some teams will, and force Shanahan to create an offensive identity around throwing the football or at least having a balanced attack. It is tougher with Trey Lance, but when you talk about Kyle Shanahan, he's been a guy who's been able to sustain strong rushing attacks. This year is going to be the tougher year because not only do you have Elijah Mitchell missing pretty much 2 months, probably the first 8 to 10 weeks of the season, you also don't have Trey Lance now. So it's going to be backups trying to rush against starting level defenses. And our backups are pretty strong usually, but it's going to be tougher. Can it be sustained? That's a question we'll have to see, but I don't think you can say it got easier with the move to Garoppolo.
I personally don't think this team can be elite because of everything you mentioned. I think Trey made this rushing attack a lot more dangerous. Elijah Mitchell clearly makes this rushing attack a lot more dangerous. I just don't think who they have left in the stable is where this rushing attack can be elite. I think it could be middle of the pack, maybe top 10 to 12, but I don't see this being a top 5 rushing attack anymore, Rohan. I just don't think they have the horses in the stable anymore. And there's a lot is to be said with Kyle Shanahan and his system being what the star is and not necessarily the running back. And they have been able to have a lot of success with running backs that were overlooked in the draft or not necessarily big names. However, we ended up realizing these running backs were pretty good. They were just overlooked, and they just ended up needing the right type of system to be successful. It's not like you could just plug any running back into Kyle Shanahan's system and they're going to necessarily thrive here. And I think that's maybe one of the misnomers that's out there, which we learned last year, right? So,
right.
It wasn't like when Elijah Mitchell maybe was overlooked, but he was a pretty good running back. And when you put Trey Sermon there or an unhealthy Jeff Wilson Jr. or Hasty, none of those guys had the same type of pop or success that Elijah Mitchell did. So it's the same type of thing, I think, right now. Jeff Wilson had a great game. Yet to be seen if he could sustain that, because clearly the game before, he didn't have a great game. So let's see what version of Jeff Wilson Jr. we have. I don't know if it's just the second back option, because it was the same type of thing where TDP had some good runs, but in the grander scheme of the game, his yards per attempt were pretty substandard, much like Jeff Wilson Jr. last game. Kind of similar, right? Because Elijah Mitchell was close to that 4.7 yards per carry,
right,
and then Jeff Wilson was 2.2. This game, Jeff Wilson was 4.7. TDP was like somewhere down there,
I believe.
Yeah. So maybe it's just the RB2 position is not going to have they're put in and not set up for success. But I do think that this rush attack goes from one that could have been top 5, top 8 to now probably in the 12 to 15 range, which as long as they could be effective enough to allow the pass, the play action to be there, I think it'll be fine. But I don't think we're looking at this rushing offense to be, I think we're looking at maybe averaging 100 to 120 yards per game versus the 150 plus that I think this rushing attack could have averaged with Trey Lance in there.
Yeah, I think that here's what I'll say. I think I'll be a little more optimistic than you, but the optimistic part isn't because of certainty, but rather uncertainty. The reason that I say that there is some potential is just because we don't know really what TDP or Jordan Mason are going to develop into towards the end of the season. And because one of them could have the ability, or maybe even both of them could have the ability to be the lead back for this team, I think there is some hope because we haven't seen them in an NFL landscape yet. But like we said, it's certainly going to be tougher. And funnily enough, the offensive line might be the unit that kind of leads that push if the run game is going to be something special this year.
Yeah, yet to see what how Anthony Lynn's going to affect this rushing attack. I don't know if I'm seeing anything that much different, but we still haven't seen Jordan Mason for whatever reason. They went to TDP. I think he did okay. He did, break off some pretty big runs in the first half, but that was with Trey there, right? Once Trey was gone, he didn't really have the same type of success. So to be seen, man. I like your optimism. Usually I'm the optimistic one, but I just don't know if we have enough speed, which I think is needed to overcome Jimmy not being a part of the running game. So to be determined. Fair. To be determined. Well, one of the parts of the game that was really dominant was the 49ers defense, right? But last week, we did see the defense be one of the major reasons why the team lost. They obviously cleaned up a lot of the penalties. Talanoa Hufanga is looking like a star. This guy is flying all over the field, making tackles, pass deflections, interceptions. The team got 2 interceptions. I don't know how many. We could count on maybe one hand how many times the 49ers defense gets multiple interception games. And the Seahawks didn't score on this defense at all. The only touchdown that they had was through special teams. So this defense put up a shutout when you talk about just offense versus defense. So, Rohan, we saw week 1 defense in the monsoon. We saw week 2 defense over an anemic offense, let's be honest. Really good receivers, some decent running backs, but maybe not the elite quarterback that you're afraid of. Is this the real defense? Is this what we are to expect from the 49ers defense moving forward?
I'd like to think so. I think that even last week there were glimpses of this defense. It's just penalties haunted the team. And obviously penalties aren't necessarily a thing that, will be a week in and week out basis. I think penalties are more rare, right, than that kind of outlook. But when you talk about the defense of this team, you saw this week, right, how even like the pass rush was sustainable. You had Nick Bosa getting to the quarterback. You had Charles Omenihu making plays. You had guys kind of just making impact plays on the quarterback, getting to the line of scrimmage, forcing Geno Smith to get the ball out quick. That was something that we saw a ton from Geno Smith today or on yesterday, getting that ball out quick. But more importantly, I think the secondary looks much better than last year, right? And this is without Jimmy Ward in the fold. Talanoa Hufanga has looked like a star so far. There's no way else to put it. Talanoa Hufanga has been one of the best, if not the best, defensive player for the 49ers in the entire defense. And that is saying something given the amount of stars that we've seen so far.
Right.
Yes,
superstars. We're talking about all pros, right? Bosa, Warner, right? And Hufanga is the one that's standing out and making this defense click.
And we see Harold's comment here saying we'll be a strong leader soon. I disagree. I think he's already a leader. He will be a strong leader maybe soon, but I think he's already been a leader. I saw it in training camp, and then even on plays yesterday, you see Hufanga dissecting the offensive look, and then actually shouting out to his teammates what the look's going to be like. His speed was heavily criticized, and that was one of the reasons my draft grade dropped, because can he really play that deep end safety? That's still unknown. But in the role that the 49ers have placed him in, he has great quick speed. That burst is there for Talanoa Hufanga, which is something I saw in training camp. He's there near the line of scrimmage. He consistently has good vision to make to take the right angles in the run game, getting tackles for loss, and his coverage skills, at least as a robber, his coverage skills have looked pretty good. So to me, I'm very excited to see what Talanoa Hufanga looks like in 2022, and I think that the 49ers found themselves another late-round gem here in Talanoa Hufanga, who was actually one of my more favorite players from the draft last year.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like we still have guys that are going to be coming back in Jimmy Ward and Jason Verrett that are going to make this defense even more electric, right? So the fact that we're seeing this type of defense and the type of play of Hufanga, you mean pairing him with Jimmy Ward instead of the guys that have been paired with him back there right now, we're looking at another elite combo and duo where it makes sense now why the team didn't really worry about not re-signing Tart, right? Because they obviously knew what they had in Hufanga. But I think that as far as this defense, Rohan, we are going to continue to see this defense if the offense could put up the type of points that they put up this week. This is the type of defense that we'll see if they could make opposing teams' offense one-dimensional, because we know that the strength of this team is the pass rush. And if a team has to throw the ball because they're down by 10 points, 14 points, 21 points, and they could score the way that this offense did in the first half, this defense is going to be top 3. There's no way to stop them. They have too many weapons, too much depth, and they're too disciplined when it comes to that. I mean, now that we have these cornerbacks in Mosley and Ward, you're not afraid of a duo of Metcalf and Lockett like we were in previous seasons, because we didn't have cornerbacks that could match up. Now,
right,
wherever whoever's on either side, whatever wide receivers are there, you're confident that Charvarius or Mooney Ward and I guess he doesn't want to be called Charvarius anymore. Mooney Ward and Emmanuel Mosley you're confident that they're going to be all right with them, right? And now that we have a Hufanga back there that is being a ball hawk, and then eventually in a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks or 3-4 weeks, we'll probably see Jimmy Ward back there as well. Our back end is going to be set, right? The linebacker, Trey Greenlaw, played a much better game. He was more playing within himself versus overdoing things. I mean, he had the uppercut moment where he was trying to get the ball out of, I think it was one of the running backs' hands at the end of the game. But overall, I think he played a lot better. Obviously, Fred Warner is solid. And you got to see Nick Bosa with a 2-sack game, right? Which is something that we want to continue to see. Drake Jackson got involved there. And so overall, I think that this defense is going to be top 5 to 8 for sure. I think this defense will be top 3 if the offense could give them some help with scoring points. And that's where I think this defense really was able to explode this week, is because they actually got to play with the lead versus having to play 0-0 or from behind, which I think gives them a little bit of a freedom, which makes this defense very dangerous, because a lot of these players are instinct players. So if you're allowed to give them the freedom to play with their instincts, Rohan, I think this becomes a very, very dangerous defense.
I think that you nailed it right there, right? You talk about the entirety of the defense. This is the cornerback duo has been elite so far. You talk about Mooney Ward and Emmanuel Mosley. Both players have been consistently making plays, and this was, in a way, their first real test, because you're going against Tyler Lockett, you're going against DK Metcalf, and while Lockett had a 100-yard gain, a ton of those catches were kind of a ton of those catches were shorter catches, and I believe he had one pretty big gain overall. But to me, the 49ers defensive play calling, all of it has looked sound so far. You talk about Trey Greenlaw. I thought he had a better game in week 2 compared to week 1. The 49ers just seem to trust each other. 2 interceptions in this game. Travarius Ward had one. Obviously, the Hufanga deflection for the Sean Gibson one, that was there as well. So the 49ers forcing turnovers, limiting yards, and really dominating the game flow defensively. You can even make that argument that they did similar in at least the first half of the last game. But if the defensive front can stop the run with the new revamped defensive front with Javon Kinlaw and Ark Armstead in the middle, and can consistently get to the quarterback in pass rushing situations, I think this team is going to be a very well-rounded team.
What do you make of the Kevin Givens sighting? I thought we saw a lot more of Kevin Givens near the end of the game. Did you see anything where Kinlaw was injured, or did you think this was more the game was out of reach at a certain point and they just felt like, let's rest Kinlaw type of situation?
I didn't necessarily think I saw Kinlaw get injured in the game. Obviously, we have to see for somebody to clear it up. It was interesting because Kinlaw played 39 snaps in week one, played only 21 snaps in week two, which is 43% of the defensive snaps. And then Kevin Givens came in and played a significant amount. I mean, maybe not a significant amount, but a pretty solid amount, right? Over there at the end of the game, he played 19 snaps compared to Kinlaw's 21. So you can take it as you will. I think it was more so resting Kinlaw compared to injury because I just didn't see the injury. But maybe there was something that was bothering Kinlaw. Didn't hear that he went to the injury tent. We'll see how though Kyle Shanahan addresses that kind of part if it comes up in the press conferences this week. But I like to see Kevin Givens get some snaps. He had 4 tackles, and the big thing, 3 tackles for loss. Good performance from Kevin Givens in limited action over there yesterday.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, Rohan, you kind of touched on it. This is turning into a defense that is turning over the ball, which is something that isn't necessarily known or isn't necessarily a big deal or a big the word is evading me right now, but it isn't normal for the 49ers defense, right? It hasn't been a strength of theirs. They've been really good at the sacks. They've been really good at holding down the scoring of teams, the bend not break type mentality, but actually turning over the ball. This is something that hasn't happened since maybe the 2019 season when Richard Sherman was still, playing near his prime, still on the at the lower end, but he's still being able to be a guy that could get interceptions and stuff. So it's good to see that now we have some ball hawks there, right? Hufanga is getting in there, pass deflecting. Mooney Ward is getting in there in interceptions. And I think like when Ward comes back, he's going to be another person that could get in there. And obviously Mosley has that capability as well. So that is one thing that if they could continue to do, will make this defense very dangerous and can help with that complementary bar, because when you're getting those turnovers, you're also giving better field position for the offense. And that's something that I think Jimmy can or needs and can actually help him look like a better quarterback, because in 2019, when they were so dominant, a lot of that had to do with a very opportunistic defense and having better field position. So the fact that this defense is showing those signs very early, and once again, not against necessarily scary offenses, but still they're maximizing the opportunities that are there. I think that bodes well for this team moving forward and something to keep an eye on if they could continue to do this. I think the next week coming up, Rohan, it's going to be a good test to see, can they do it against like an elite quarterback in Russell Wilson and, the weapons that he has there in Denver, Mile High, all of the things next stacked against the 49ers as far as that. Can they be as opportunistic? Can they keep him contained? And can they turn over the ball? And if they can, I think this is going to be a pretty fun season for both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I think so too. And like you said, the offense, it's kind of dependent on the offense, how great this defense can be. But as certain teams in the past have been, this is going to be a defensive-centric team that also relies on the offense to score points when needed. So to me, still think the defense is the stronger side of the ball, despite the amount of playmakers on offense. And we'll see how this defense plays against Russell Wilson and company, who has struggled in the first 2 weeks of the season. I believe he only put up 16 points in week 2 again, and that was against a Texans defense that isn't necessarily one of the stronger ones in the league.
Right, but let's not give him his confidence back, right? Let's keep him struggling and let him go into week 4 and figure it out, but not week 3. Rohan, that's the show, man. Thank you so much for making the time. I know it's early. We got it in on a Monday. What is the rest of your week looking like? And where can these guys find you for the rest of the week?
Yeah, so Monday is going to be the busy day today, this week. Later tonight, I've got me and Marco coming along for an episode of 49ers Red Zone to recap yesterday's game. Be sure to check that out. That is likely going to be at 7 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Central, 10 p.m. Eastern, if you guys are on those time schedules. So be sure to check that out. But Sunil, appreciate you. Obviously a great show, and obviously we're going to come back and do it again.
Absolutely, man. We need to get you over this sickness, bro. I feel like you've been sick for like a week now.
It's funny because it went away and then it came back just a little bit, but we're fine now. We're working with it.
I love it. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining in. The chat section, like I said, is always extremely lit. Thank you guys for tapping in, your questions, your comments. It really makes the show fun. Rohan and I are both on a push to get to 1,000. I'm under 50 subscribers away, like 43 subscribers, I think, away from 1,000. I know Rohan is slowly grinding up there too. So if you haven't, if you're subscribed to me and aren't subscribed to Rohan, that's criminal. He is amazing at what he does. So make sure it's free. Just click the link in the description and just click the subscribe button to there. And if you haven't subscribed to me and you enjoy what you see, please do that as well. We are trying to get to 1,000 here as soon as possible. But once again, thank you for joining into the show. Stay safe, stay hydrated, and have a beautiful, beautiful rest of the day, guys. We'll talk again very soon.